Сегодня господин Фостер здесь, мы, не услышав его ответ, уйти с этого заседания будет неправильно. У нас большинство избирателей, когда мы бываем в регионе, говорят о том, что очень высокие цены. Сравнительно с Европой, сейчас министр сказал, но в Европе заработные платы и другие. И в Европе средняя цена лоукостеров 20 евро. Средняя цена. У нас цены лоукостера, которые называем Флайерстан, вот я сегодня просмотрел, до 10 января 60 тысяч тенге до Туркестана, 50 тысяч тенге до Кызылорды, плюс-минус. Какой это лоукостер? Это не может быть такое. Почему? Самая большая проблема, что это две авиакомпании, на самом деле это одно юридическое лицо, один транспорт, и они сейчас сделали как? Сегодня у граждан нет выбора. Лоукостер должен быть так. Air Astana летит, и должен рядом рейс Флайерстан. Тогда у граждан появляется выбор. Здесь у тебя полное обслуживание, здесь, значит, более дешевая цена. Вот у меня господину Фостеру вопрос. Почему Air Astana не осуществляет полеты, рейсы, например, в ту же Кызылорду с Астаны? Почему у нас нет выбора у граждан? Почему только Флайерстан? Как формируется цена? Насколько лоукостер сегодня оправдывает свое название? Цена на рейс сегодня обычный лоукостер, который мы называем Флайерстан, она больше $100 до регионов. Вот сегодня мы сейчас смотрим, как она формируется. Когда, может, граждане могут добиться более дешевой цены? Почему сегодня авиакомпании, я вот вчера сам прилетел вечером на авиарейсе Air Astana, в салоне просидели 1,5 часа. Просто так, никто ничего не объяснял. Почему допускаются при нормальной погоде такие задержки?
Фостер Мурза.
И по ценам, самое главное, почему скрытые цены? Вот недавно мы узнали, что $1 миллиард тенге в Air Astana выявили хищение именно во Флайерстан. Имеете ли вы к этому и ваши замы к этому отношение? Вернут ли эти деньги гражданам, которые лишние деньги заплатили за авиабилеты?
Рахмет. Господин Фостер, включите микрофон. Представитель управления Air Astana.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the questions. There are quite a lot of issues raised there in the questions, so I'll try and answer them in the order they were raised. Firstly, perhaps just to sort of point out the fact that the Air Astana Group is not a monopoly. Since 2011, the domestic monopoly was discontinued, and now there are 4 licensed airlines. 2 of those, correctly, as the deputies pointed out, in the Air Astana Group. that's Air Astana and Flyerastan. There's also SCAT and Kazakh has been pointed out. And there is no longer a monopoly on domestic and, of course, not international routes. Secondly, with regard to Fly Arastan's ticket prices, last year, or rather I should say up until the end of November of this year, 21% of tickets were sold under 10,000 tenge, 37% of tickets were sold under 15,000 tenge. I should just point out that of Fly Arastan's 4.1 million passengers to November this year, approximately 3.8 million of those are on domestic routes and 270,000 on international routes. So you can see that Fly Arastan is a much larger operator of domestic services than Air Astana is. And that, I think, perhaps answers the question why there are more flights on Fly Arastan domestically than there are on Air Astana, because Air Astana is largely concentrating on developing international routes now and less domestic. As far as the ticket prices are concerned, I think everybody's familiar with the low-cost airline model. The idea, of course, obviously, is that the earlier the tickets are purchased, the cheaper the tickets are. The closer to the day of departure, the higher the ticket prices become. The ticket prices also vary depending on demand, and so therefore prices are higher, for example, towards weekends, towards holiday periods. This is referred to in the industry as dynamic pricing. It is a worldwide practice. It's when Fly Aerostan was launched in May 2019, it was on the clear understanding that the low-cost dynamic pricing model would be applied, and that's what's happened. And again, just to remind everybody, this year Fly Aerostan has carried 4.1 million passengers. In terms of, you know, all airlines are largely, in terms of cost, are largely in dollar denominated in terms of cost. Aerostan or Fly Aerostan, SCAT are no exceptions to that. Approximately, as a rule of thumb, 66%, two-thirds of all costs for an airline tend to be dollar denominated, mostly aircraft and aircraft related expenses such as maintenance and so forth. So, you know, the cost base for the industry is what it is. It has, of course, gone up since COVID. There have been all sorts of supply chain problems within the manufacturers, within the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. I think these are well known to many people, certainly in the industry. It has forced up costs, but we retain the view that the average prices of Fly Aerostan as a low-cost airline are more than competitive when compared with low-cost airline prices in other parts of the world. It is, of course, always true that you can find a very cheap flight on a particular route at a particular time in any part of the world, but Fly Aerostan's prices are comparatively extremely competitive, and that is driven by the fact that Fly Aerostan's unit cost is one of the very lowest in the world, lower than Ryanair and EasyJet and Wizz Air and some of the other well-known low-cost airlines, and that gives Fly Aerostan the ability to sell prices that it does. That does not avoid the fact that as one comes closer to the departure date, particularly during peak seasons, prices are higher. That's how the model works, and that's how the company is able to be sustainable and profitable. And after all, let me just remind everybody that the Aerostana Group companies are not subsidized. They don't receive any money from government whatsoever. They never have done since 2002. They're entirely self-sufficient. And unlike, you know, many companies in the region here, in other countries in the region, which have been quoted during this conversation. As far as delays and cancellation and consent, of course, we apologize for that. Overall, the company has an on-time performance record in 2024 year-to-date of 74.67%. That's slightly higher than Europe. That said, of course, at this particular point, it's a difficult period. We know we're operating in challenging conditions. We also had a very difficult period in the middle of August that some of you may remember. Again, we apologize for any inconvenience. We do our best to minimize that. The conditions are what they are. Thank you, Chairman.
Господин Фостер, ответьте на вопрос депутата по поводу хищения Fly Aerostan.
Да, по поводу, здесь же не ответили на вопрос, почему у вас нет выбора? Я других тоже не
Мурат Абломович, давайте мы будем проводить правчас. Господин Фостер, вы можете ответить на вопрос депутата по поводу хищения средств? Yes,
I think that's in the public domain. This took place in Fly Aerostan. It involved the manipulation of ticket prices. It was discovered by the management of Fly Aerostan. Fly Aerostan then engaged the services of an international, one of the big four agencies, to conduct a forensic audit. That audit has been completed and handed to the police. It is very upsetting, of course. We do not tolerate any behavior of this nature, but I would just like to say that in the overall scheme of the total revenues of Aerostana, of Fly Aerostan, it's rather de minimis, as we say. It doesn't affect, obviously, the cost of tickets or the operation in any way. It is something, of course, obviously, that we do not, as a public listed company in Astana and Almaty and London, we do not tolerate.
Уважаемые коллеги, переходим к обсуждению вопроса. Хотел бы опять призвать вас к регламенту. Значит, 5 минут, микрофон отключается. договорились, да, чтобы просто могли большее количество выступающих, значит,